Jake, thank you so much. And I just realized, like, I was thinking, gosh, that's such a great summary. And then I was like, crap, I forgot to start recording. So I'll just say really quickly, we're recording now. Welcome to the AMP meeting. Today is Thursday, May 7th. I think I have the day and the time, the day correct, day and date. And today, Jake has just shared that he is creating materials based on previous AMP meetings that are using materials like that are free. So like not using paid services like Labster or Invisible Body, knowing that those items, while they may be free now, will not be free going forward. And a lot of colleges are thinking about going fully online in the fall. So and Jake, you've tested in with your students. This is a test of how well was Jen listening. You've checked in with your students to say, how is this going for you? And you get they said, kind of as well as can be expected. But the inquiry question you're sort of thinking about is that because they didn't choose this and they're kind of, well, I didn't want an online class anyway? Or is there can we continue to think about what makes a high quality learning experience online, knowing that it's different than face-to-face? How is that, Jake? Did I say it back to you?
Yeah. I think you covered most of the points. Like I said, it's trying to develop these labs away from subscription services and then making sure that I'm covering everything the students need for what they need to succeed. And like I've said, I've had some students say that the labs are helping them, that they're doing the work. I have a lot of really repetitive assignments, so there's a lot of labeling and diagrams and things like that they do online. But I just, I'm always worried that my students aren't getting enough out of what I'm giving them, because sometimes it feels like I'm just giving them like a really basic quiz instead of a real lab where they would be like messing with models or looking at actual organ systems or brains or anything like that. I will tell you, one of the things that is kind of a catch-22 that I don't know if anybody else is doing what I'm doing is using the Canvas Commons. Um, I've developed a lot of my labs using materials I found on Canvas Commons. But one thing to be aware of is because there's nobody editing or monitoring those labs, you really have to be careful with the material that's on Commons. I've had a couple of labs where they looked great, and I cobbled together some stuff, and then later my students were like, "These questions were all wrong," and then I'd look at it and be like, "Oh, how did I miss that? That the answers were wrong, or they were labeled incorrectly, or diagrams wouldn't appear." So I've definitely had to start going back and guaranteeing that the stuff I'm getting off Commons actually works. But other than that, it does work pretty well.
Hey, Jake, thank you so much. And I guess the other thing I would say is I was hoping that maybe today we could look at the Canvas shell together and see like maybe if people could start curating their best of the best into the A&P Canvas shell, especially for fall. So let's go back to Jake's. Actually, before we start with the kind of our agenda, is there anything else that folks would like to throw out as I'd really like to make sure before we leave we talk about this? Anything else?
I'm. You asked what brought us here today.
Yeah.
I'm here to glean because you all did a great job getting us ready for this quarter. And I just think it is amazing how well the board has done, I think, getting people together. And I've really appreciated that. This is my first quarter online teaching. There was so much to start with that I felt like I had a lot of stuff to try, and I haven't exhausted that yet. But I'm on a track, and I think my new experimenting is going to be minimal. So I don't even know what to ask for at this point. I'm going to get through this quarter and then evaluate. So it's really just to glean and learn what things I haven't thought about asking yet.
Thank you so much, Joe. And yeah, I think that's a good place to be in. Like you're like, I'm on a track and I'm just here to kind of listen and learn. And thank you so much. So and Tova, I know you've been typing into the chat, and Pete, you as well. So anything to use and to enhance student learning, especially with lab content, and okay. So
Can I add one thing?
please.
Because I'm at Walla Walla, last college that hasn't yet gone to a 2-quarter A&P sequence, and I'm frustrated because I don't fully understand why we've all gone to that, although the 4-year college will accept it. So right now, I'm being requested to, I don't know how to put it, but to dummy down A&P. And if I'm dumbing down the lecture content, then I'm going to dummy down the lab content. I'm going to make this essentially a 100 level course, because that's what it is. When you tell me I have to teach a full year of A&P that I can't even teach in 3 quarters adequately in only 2 quarters. And so I'm concerned. I want to do the best for students, but the universities are telling us we don't have to. And so I'm kind of going, are we just overreacting? Who cares? I'm being, again, facetious here, but who cares if students don't get what they really need? Because we're not doing it anyway. And so, that's just something that's really come out. Just got a note yesterday that we're looking at doing this for chemistry and doing it for this. I'm going, then why don't we do it for every class? Why don't we do it for physics search? Why don't we do it for history search? Why don't we dummy down everything? And I don't understand it, because K through 12 is all going, we need to teach our students more and more and more. But now we're being told we need to teach students less. So I'm very frustrated with all this and where it's coming from, and nobody has answers, but everybody's doing it. And I don't just want to be a follower. I want to do what's best for students, and I don't think we are. So that's maybe totally off issue, but I still want to do the best I can, but it's frustrating.
So I definitely think we can talk about that, because I think I have a lot of clarifying questions, and also I'm not, but Lucas, you've got lots of discipline experts here too, to talk to you about this. So I think we can talk about, I'm just wondering if they asked you, I'd like to hear more about dumbing it down. What does that mean? And then maybe we can think of a way that you can give the administration what they want, but also do the things that are going to work for students. I wonder if, so maybe we could spend some more time talking about what exactly your administration is asking, and just kind of parse that out a little bit.
Can I give you my perspective on this, having been a part of that?
Kim, hi, yes.
So the biggest driver of that I teach at Tacoma Community College, was the nursing program. So nursing was trying to, for their accreditation, consolidate the number of prerequisite courses so that, I don't know, they could offer more nursing courses or something. Essentially it was taking nursing students 4 years to get a 2-year degree. So that was the problem. And so they were trying to trim prereq credits any way they could. And they forced the move to, there was pressure. And so the nursing has always, we've always offered a 2-credit and a 3-credit course, but nursing very much needs to only be able to say there are 10 credits or 12 credits of prereq A&P for their programs. So essentially, we did offer a 3-credit course, and it was very under-enrolled because students thought they only had to take a 2-credit one. The problem is the successful completion rate is terrible, because we have very high, we do expect them to learn way more than you really theoretically can in 2 quarters. And we do have a Bio 160 prereq on it, which helps. But yeah, it's the problem is that you're just, if it's a very strong student, they do well. If it's not a strong student, it's really super tough for them to successfully learn that material. They really need a 3-credit course. Most students do. And I would love to see some sort of here's the criteria on which we let you into a 2-credit course. We think you can handle it in 2 credits. Here's the criteria on which you need to take it as a 3-credit course, and the expectations and outcomes are the same.
Yeah, I agree with that. Our nursing program has the same thing. But at the same time, they say the most important class you nursing students that are trying to get entry into our program need to do well in and really learn is A&P. but we only want you to cover 2 out of the 3 quarters of the year. I'm going, that's idiotic. That makes no sense. And they say, well, it's because the accrediting body says we can only have this many, like you say, credits to get in. But then they drop class and then they add 2 humanities. I have nothing against humanities, but I'm saying add 1 humanity and add A&P instead, the 3rd quarter.
But the driver behind that is the transfer. I've worked closely with them on the DTA to transfer to a 4-year bachelor's degree, and they were required to have that many humanities in there too. And they tried to shave every single credit off they could by like co-recking a humanity with everything. And so it's a fundamental problem between a 2-year and a 4-year nursing, and because most of our 70%-ish of our A&P students are pre-nursing, it just I can see the nursing perspective on it, and they really are trying to get way too much stuff into quote unquote 2-year degree. So it's I think unrealistic expectations for a 2-year degree, or I don't know. It's a nursing accreditation problem for sure, but it's not the nursing being, at least our nursing faculty being, whatever. They do understand the problems, but they can't fix them.
Right.
I just look at these accrediting bodies and I wonder where they're getting their information, because I know an awful lot of physicians, high-level nursing people that are out there, and they're all going, what? You don't have to take a full year of A&P anymore? That are just dumbfounded by it. And somebody needs to get the message to these accrediting groups and say, what is your reason behind this? Can you explain this to the medical community, why nurses don't have to have as much science, but they have to have more humanities or psychology
it's a fundamental
or whatever?
Problem between 2-year and 4-year programs, and there's a big driver to push 2-year programs out. So it's really the politics of all that stuff, which is way beyond what we can have any impact on.
Well, we can't give up, because then nothing gets done.
Some of the bigger things here too is that when they redesigned the curriculum was so that when they graduated from a 2-year college with their RN, they could go get their BSN and everything would line well, so that they weren't having to go 2 or 3 more years to get their BSN, because now they're starting to require BSN from nurses. That was one of the redesign purposes. But in terms of trying to refocus, maybe, because some of that stuff we're not going to solve in this group, and I think it'd be good for us to get back to things we can do to help with what we're doing. Something that I would suggest that we've done is go talk to your nursing faculty and find out how are your students who maybe come out of your A&P that go into their program doing in their A&P, because they're going to recover a lot of the same material you're teaching if you go talk to the 1st-year nursing faculty, and find out how they're scoring on their tests. Because what we've done is talk to our nursing faculty and say, okay, what are they lacking in, and what do we need to emphasize, what's important if the majority of your students are nursing. And I get it if they're not. There's some things you have to look at there. And then how are they scoring on their NCLEX related to physiology? And what we found is our students, one, have been doing really well in nursing after taking our 2-quarter A&P, and 2, they're still scoring really well in the NCLEX related to that, and our nursing program is amazing for that. So I think talking through those things is a good way to address that as well, because some of these larger structures, this group of A&P faculty aren't going to change right now. And so it's about kind of doing what maybe you can do to help that area out. I know for a lot of our pre-med, those kind of things, they should be, for us, we advise people that aren't nursing to look more towards a biology major. And then when they transfer to a 4-year, they're going to be taking their upper level years of anatomy, physiology, different things, and they're getting comparative anatomy, physiology in their majors. So I really look at our A&P at our 2-year colleges, at least at LCC, as really a way, as a driver for educating nurses. So I really think of it that way: dental hygiene, nursing, and I try to focus it on that, and that I think helps grapple with that 2-quarter process. So that's just some insight there from my perspective.
Just a comment that way, because I have talked to nursing and they say, well, The topics that you discuss in A&P3, our students do well on the board exams that they're teaching. Well, then why are we needing AP at all? They should be able to teach everything. If they can teach 1/3 of AP, then they're obviously teaching all of it. Why is A&P even a requirement then, a prerequisite, if they're doing the job in the nursing program?
I was struck by two things. One of them, as a tenure committee person for nursing, I was sitting in the classes, and I was struck by what students did not remember of A&P when they were getting some of their clinical. But the other piece of it was I asked to see some of the sample questions that the students were expected to take. And I was struck by how little A&P there was. It was more thought process questions. And maybe I didn't even see the right test, because I was astonished really how little A&P there was. But it was more process sorts of questions and thinking sorts of questions. So it was both sides of it. One, that the students, some of mine even, I was surprised what they weren't remembering when they got into the clinical application, but also how little was required on the testing that they were doing later.
Thanks, Joe. And Pete, I know sometimes there's these things that just, you know, so it's, I think it's great that we got a chance to discuss this with other, you know, it's nice to be able to get a sense of what's happening at other colleges. And I'm sorry that we can't resolve this today, but thanks again for bringing it to our collective attention. And I hope that at least just being able to discuss it took some of the edge off.
No, you're right. It is good to talk about it, and even though we're maybe limited in what we can do, but you know, I guess I focus too much on thinking that everything we should do should be towards student success. And when I see things that we're doing that aren't that way, I just throw up my hands. I get so frustrated. I just don't understand.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure no, but thank you again. And yeah, and I'm with you. Like, we want to do things that are really student focused. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring us back to the question that Jake raised kind of early on. So as people are designing their labs and teaching their labs, I think so Jake, just to go back to kind of what you were saying, you wanted to kind of hear what people are. I'm just looking. I took notes in it. I took notes on what you said, and now I can't find it. But
yeah, I was just basically what I was wanting was to hear what people's experience have been with developing their online labs and how their students are dealing with it. And if anybody's doing somewhat similar to where, like I am, by trying to develop labs that don't use a subscription service, and if they're finding success with that or not.
Perfect. So folks, what's your experience developing labs? How are your students experiencing it?
I have been using Visible Body, and definitely as an accessory. I'm going to jump a little bit to the piece of trying to avoid the subscription. The other piece I've been doing is case studies, and that one is free, and that has been very useful, and the students really enjoy that. I have these mixed feelings as the last probably 5 years I've been moving towards open source things. I have not found that the A&P ones are the same quality as some of the paid ones. And so I get that we want to make things accessible, and that if we want to not disadvantage students by not taking away resources. The other side of that is, if somebody with more resources is getting better tools to learn with, maybe it's even just a subscription service, are we just sort of shifting where that disadvantage is for what they head to next? I use the OpenStax text, and I have no objection. I think it's a decent text. The bells and whistles that the other publishers have are value added. And I think the students who are using some of those tools have a better grasp of things. So by not encouraging those tools, am I just shifting where the disadvantage is? That's a question I have. I do very much like there's a University of Buffalo, their case study collection. The students have really gotten into that. And in my labs, I'm focused more on physiology and discussion around that, and just hoping they get the anatomy out of the 2D things in their books mostly, or on the visible body. So and I'm doing just the 242, the second quarter of A&P. I'll be doing the 241 in the fall, and I'm kind of at a loss what I'm going to do for that for the labs.
Joe, thanks.
I'll say that's kind of where I'm at as well. I'm actually teaching 104 right now, which is our kind of a lower level 242. And I found that it's working well for those students. But again, in the fall, I'm actually going to start teaching 241, and then next winter I'll be teaching 242. So I definitely want to find something that's a bit more advanced. And you're absolutely right. We may just have to sink those subscription costs. We may have to ask our students to pay a lab fee for something like that, or encourage the department to pay for more. My whole thing is right now my school is not making a decision about that. Like, they're kind of just throwing it around, batting it around, and I'm worried about developing something this quarter that isn't going to be implemented next quarter when it comes to subscription services and things like that. So that's kind of why I've been avoiding it.
And I think some of it is going to depend right on just as Jake's talking about, the institution you're at, the support in terms of our students maybe getting Chromebooks. Because I know I'm currently running a 242, two sections of 242. They're using Lapster because they're the online course I've been teaching for a long time. And so Lapster was built into that. And they had planned on taking Lapster since, probably February when they were registering for it. And then I have my two sections that are face-to-face that moved online, but I'm not using Lapster, and I'm doing more of what you're talking about, Jake. I would say students have always said that they have had a great learning experience in these courses. And they felt like, and they've done well compared to face-to-face in terms of, I give cumulative exams that are like the HAPS type exam at the end, and they do well. There's no problems there. But they always say it's, they miss that hands-on experience with the cadavers or the Syndaver or the models, and it's hard to replicate that online unless they're getting models and some of those things as well. But I do know that the case studies is a fantastic way to go. I'm leaning heavy on case studies and physiology, and looking at making them very process oriented right now. So it's I don't know that we're ever going to fix that in A&P Online, just because there's so much that can be of value when you're looking at a cadaver or some of those models in the 3D environment, unless we come up with ways to provide cheap 3D models at home for students, which is a whole nother conversation, especially with how expensive models are.
So Jake, if we could go back to you for a moment, I'm just thinking of something that you said about you're not sure if the students are getting what they need. And I was just wondering, when you think about, when I think about this from an English perspective, I really want students to leave English 101 knowing how to go through a full writing process for a paper. So it's easier for me to think about this in terms of my own discipline. So what are the things that you're really hoping students will get?
So I'm kind of in a unique position because while I have in the past taught upper division physiology courses, this is my first time actually teaching an A&P class that's a lower division and more focused on both anatomy and physiology. So it's my first time actually teaching 104, which has kind of put me at a disadvantage at trying to figure out exactly what I want the students to come out of it with. So things that I have been hopefully trying to implement are ideas like, if they can understand what, previous weeks I've done things like blood typing. So there's a really great blood typing simulation you can find online. It was a game that was developed, and I built a module around that. And the students seem to get that pretty well in terms of what blood typing is, what it means when you do different blood types. And then other times I'm looking at things like, especially with anatomy, just basically understanding pathways. So understanding where the hepatic portal is, what is the the major veins and arteries of the body, why are they different on a microscopic scale, things like that. So it's not having a previous face-to-face experience in this course has put me at a disadvantage at trying to figure out exactly what I want the students to come out with. So that's kind of where I'm struggling a little bit, and I think that's one of the disadvantages I have developing these materials. That's actually one of the reasons why I keep coming to these meetings, is because I'm just kind of hoping to get that idea at some point, is being like, okay, yes, I am on the right path, that my students are getting what they need, or no, I need to be focusing more on this type of material. I love hearing about the case studies. That's one of the things I haven't implemented much this quarter, but I definitely will when it comes to 241, simply because at that point I feel like I'll have a better grasp of what the students will need in terms of basic understanding, and then giving them things like case studies to work through.
Jake, would it be useful if folks shared with you kind of like what exactly they're teaching, like what the concepts are? Would that be useful?
It would be nice to see like what the basic proficiencies that you would expect for each portion of material, because again, A&P is so varied that like when you look at bone structure, it's mostly like these are the bones, versus when you look at like respiratory tract, well, what's tidal volume, what's how does respiratory frequencies change? So I'm just trying to hopefully kind of get some, if nothing else than just bullet points that basically say, hey, these are what we would expect our students to be able to come out with a basic understanding for a 100 level class, instead of me just hoping that I'm hitting them.
Do folks want to weigh in? What are those basic proficiencies?
That is a question I've been asking for the last 15, 20 years. And I can tell you that in my small circle, I think I'm considered as having a longer list of things to know. And when I've looked at the HAPS test, there's not a chance my students would finish that full out in terms of the level of detail the HAPS test seems to go for. So the range seems about 10 miles wide, and I base it more on what was useful to me when I was doing clinical work in a couple different settings, and what my teachers taught me 100 years ago. I think a really useful thing was, what is the entire list of muscles we're going to learn? What is the entire list of bone pieces we're going to learn? I mean, if somebody, maybe that somebody is us, compiled some of those lists that are the objective things of, here are the 15 things on the humerus that you're going to learn, or whatever the number is, that might help put boundaries around, okay, so it sort of looks like this when we're getting into the physiology of nerves or the different regions of the brain and how they interact and all that. Because there's some of it, I don't know how we would pin it down. Some of it we could come up with these objective lists of, when I quiz you on the anatomy, this is what I expect. But that's a question I've wondered about for years.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I've kind of gone on this is thinking about it as in terms of like, this is the beginning level of what they're learning, and if they plan to go into any of these careers, they're going to have to see this material over and over and over and over again. So instead of worrying about them mastering it all right now, more or less trying to figure out a way to give them the tools so that when they do see it again, it's kind of like, hey, I kind of remember that, or, oh, this word kind of means something that I know, instead of, oh, I know every bone that was in the ankle. So that's just kind of one of the things that I've been struggling with, is trying to strike that balance where it's, you are best prepared to just keep learning it in the future for, whatever career you're in, without over inundating them with all like the hyper specific information, because I tended to go overboard on the physiology side for things like that. Instead of giving hyper specific information, just so they feel like if they see it again, they're competent in it. Or if they were to read like a newspaper article that talked about something, they would at least have a little bit better of an idea of this than someone who hadn't taken my class. So that's kind of where I've been approaching it from. But again, it's still difficult, like teaching it the first time through.
Jay, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I thought about this a lot too, and I finally came to the conclusion that really we're not teaching the names of structures. We're only teaching a language, and having a critical mass of vocabulary is important. So it doesn't really matter what is in that critical mass. It matters that there is a critical mass, that you can kind of converse in this language, that you know roughly the constructs that we use and the concepts that we use, and that you've been things like making them learn origins, insertions, bony markings. Most clinical nurses are not using that material as material, but it's a really important piece for us in training the students to be observant of fine detail, so highly observant, and to report their observations accurately, because that's the skill that's going to serve them as they move forward from that experience. It's not knowing what the parts of the humerus are, because that's pretty easy to access, but it's having the vocabulary to go access it and not freak out because they can't understand what it is, and feeling that they really have been trained in what I think of as, a really critical skill in anatomy is observe very, very closely for detail and report that accurately. And that's not something that certainly my students do not come into A&P1 with that skill. I have to train them in that. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's really, really valuable. There's a few things here that are really valuable in terms of how we think about the content, right, and the process. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when I mentioned, like, I know most of my students are going into nursing. What are the skills they need to know within A&P to be successful down the road, right? And it's not going to be knowing every little thing, because there's no way they're going to retain every little thing. But if I can make them observant, as you're talking about, Jay, and critically analyze whether it's structures or physiological content, right, or data in terms of that's why I love case studies that I write, is making them really critically evaluate the pathways of processes in the body and how things can go awry, and looking at loops. And so there's just so much you can do to really train and help a student become a critical thinker in physiology and anatomy, which to me, from my perspective, is going to make them a better nursing student and a better nurse. Is it going to make them an anatomist? No, it's not going to make them anatomist. But if you're going to be an anatomist, you're going to go get a master's and PhD in anatomy. So I'm trying to help educate and train future nurses. So that's kind of where I try to really focus. I think Jay did a great job of bringing some of those key points in there.
I also am seeing something that Joe wrote in the chat that I feel like Jay also said. So it may be the win is training students how to approach the material and think through it. And Jay, I think that's what you were also what you were saying with the language, like what's the lingua franca? Do they feel like they've been apprenticed enough that they can approach new material and think through it without freaking out? And and also, Lucas, I love that point that you made about what does critical thinking look like in this discipline? Because I think we talk a lot about critical thinking, but most critical thinking assessment tools are very general. And what really interests me is when critical thinking is more specific to a discipline. And Jay said it's not a metaphor. Jay, go ahead, say that.
So it actually is a language. Just hang out with some doctors or nurses who are speaking in the language, and you'll see that it's not comprehensible to others. Now that I have my own political opinion about why that is. I think that creates an elitist environment they really like, but it really is true. You can go and talk to a group of medical care providers and speak in a language that other folks will not know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right.
You guys are making fun. But that is so important. I'm not an MD, but I'm a DVM and I practiced for 10 years and until I was hurt, and then went into education. But you have to know the language. And I think that is critical. You have to be able to understand what's going on, and students, will learn more than they think they learn because if they apply that. But, the bottom line is everybody wants to know about diseases, but our job is to teach what is normal so that you can recognize when it's not normal. And so you can't really, like I put in my note there, just go on college websites and look at the different topics and sometimes objectives or course outcomes that different classes have. And I think it's a great way to get some general understanding, but we're all going to teach differently, and we can't be forced to say you have to teach this, 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 and that. We all, based on our experiences, based on our areas of individual expertise and things like that, what we're going to teach. So I don't think there's any definite right or wrong. There's just some general areas that we have to all cover.
Oh, and I would actually lobby against being too specific about it on one hand, because I totally agree. If you're coming from as a DVM, that's a great experience to bring to students, and for somebody to put boundaries around how you are bringing what you know in, that would take away from the student experience. And that's true if somebody came from a general biology or other medicine. I've looked at different course outlines, and I know when we write ours, we write them to be vague so that people can bring their own experience to it. And I think that's very important. The challenge is knowing to what depth do you go. Jake was talking about physiology, and all right, so if I'm doing respiratory physiology, do I say, yeah, the gas is diffused? Do I talk about rates? Do I talk about pH and temperature curves and how it influences? I mean, how granular do I get? That's the piece that I would like some guidance on, because I had my experience. I see some that I think that doesn't look like enough to me, but it feels like I'm measuring end to end in the middle of a football field, but nobody told me where to start with my tape measure. I don't know where the edges are. And so, yeah, it comes to what do I think worked? And mostly I tell my students, here's what I didn't understand. So that's what you have to learn. But how deep to go with it? I agree. We don't want to nail it down too closely, because it limits what we individually bring. And if we're going to do that, we just should put it all on a computer, because our individualness doesn't matter.
Can I tell you?
But how deep?
Can I tell you what has worked for English faculty in this conversation? Is thinking about when students come to you as novices, and I'll just say, like a student who comes to you and is like, I am not a writer. I will not turn in anything good this quarter. Like you could do your darndest, but I will not be a good writer. So just get ready, And so what are the threshold concepts to get that student, and reading too, like I'm just not a good reader, and math faculty as well. And so for English and math, like we've talked a lot about threshold concepts. So what are the major kind of turning points in terms of like, if you understand this, then you're a writer. And if you don't understand this, then, you're still at that novice place. Like you still don't know the language. You're still not an insider to the discourse. And so I guess I would just say, for one threshold concept in writing is understanding that writing is a process, and that nobody sits down and births a perfectly written paper from their head to 10 pages with documented sources, so, but a lot of people pay lip service to that, but they don't actually know how to do it. And so I guess I'm just wondering, are there threshold concepts in A&P that would turn somebody from, yeah, Jay, I see you nodding. What do you think?
I think there are thresholds. I mean, first I was thinking how lucky you are to be teaching respiratory physiology right now, because I'm teaching A&P1 and I get to do this in my global health class, but so fun to be teaching something that's so topical right now. And I was thinking, I usually don't teach, angiotensin 2 receptors as being, ACE2 and ACE1. I usually stop at like, ACE is enough. And now I know I can't stop at that because it's in the common medical discourse that we're existing with both of those. So you have to go to that. But I don't teach, for example, very much in lung volumes. Like I tell them this exists, this nomenclature exists. I don't think you need to know it. You just need to know, what is a forced expiratory volume over 1 minute, because that's what we use in the clinic. So I think there is some of that. You can cut loose some of those things that are not, that are really come from the fact that they were well researched and well documented, not because they are needed. Exactly the mechanism of endochondral ossification. Do we really need that? No, but you do need to know that there are growth plates and what's happening at those growth plates. So I think that kind of helps. But for me, the threshold is, can the student read a piece of material and give me an intelligible response to it that lets me know that they've got some conceptual grasp that crosses from one system to another. They can't only know about respiratory. If they need to be able to link that to the kidney and link that to circulation like that. That's kind of my gold standard for it, for what it's worth.
I think that's very helpful. So I know it's 2:45 and I'm so sorry. There's so many fun things to talk about. I'm wondering if we do want to talk about assessments, or do we want to keep this part of the conversation going, or should we move into assessments? Lucas, I'm looking for in the chat if we want to discuss proctoring. Oh, go ahead.
I think that'd be good. I think with the remaining time, Tova says yes, please. I think that would be a good idea. Move to assessment, proctoring, and help answer those questions or let people discuss those.
And what Lucas wrote in the chat is actually very perfect as a segue, because we've been really talking about learning outcomes, like in various ways. And so, Lucas, how can we meet learning outcomes without traditional assessments and proctoring? And for those of you who are doing proctored, like Tova wrote, any ideas about Respondus? Some of my students do not have the ability to use it. And Tova, I would say that Wendy Lundquist from Green River, Jake, your colleague, said that Jake, I can't remember what Green River's using, if you guys are using HonorLock or Respondus Lockdown, but Wendy said it almost gave her a heart attack.
Yeah, so this has actually been a big issue with our division, is Respondus versus HonorLock versus nothing. Because we have, the thing is we have a lot of students who are coming in from local high schools and things like that have like Chromebooks or alternative methods for taking exams and things. And they don't work with HonorLock or they don't work with Respondus, and it ends up being problematic in terms of like, well, how are you going to get this person to take this exam? Other people we've talked with have just basically given up on doing proctoring at all, simply because they've decided that instead of worrying so much about proctoring to, these really high level, high point value exams, giving lower point value exams, making it less of a stressful event, and then, just assuming that students are going to use whatever material they're going to use, but that shouldn't be the end all be all for the course. Like, you shouldn't weight everything around exams. And personally, I don't use any kind of proctoring. I found that the students that do well on all the other assignments, such as, reading quizzes and labs, do well on exams. The students who don't do well on the reading quizzes and exams don't do well on the exams. So it's even it's much more obvious with my biology class, my Bio 100 class. But even with my A&P class, I still have it still meets pretty well. So personally, I've kind of given up on the idea of using a proctoring service, just because all I think it does is increase stress for students who are trying to do well anyway. And the students who were going to cheat, they're going to figure out a way to cheat anyway. So I would rather students feel like they can succeed based on their own merit and not put so much of a value on the exam itself. And one of the things that Jay brought up was talking about students being able to look across systems and be able to connect concepts from different systems together. And that's one of the ways that I found, especially with short answer questions, to get students, even if they look stuff up online, they still can't answer the short answer questions very well, simply because they can't word it in any way that makes sense. And I found that really does, in terms of evaluation, those are actually better overall than something like a multiple choice, even though I still give multiple choice as part of the exam. So that's kind of the long and short of it. I know that other A&P faculty at my school have given up on proctoring this quarter, but are planning to do a different type of proctoring in the future. It's really up to you on that instance. And again, like I said, I don't use it myself, and I just based on the way that I've designed my course to value doing more things frequently instead of doing fewer larger term projects has kind of helped avoid that pressure to cheat on an exam. But how well that is, or how well that will work for everyone is, I don't know.
I would love to be able to compare outcomes between knowledge of key abilities, key things relative to the proctor, not proctor issue. I've got 80 students this quarter. I'm not willing to do frequent, every week, 10 essay questions for all 80 of my students? Like, I can't keep up with that. So while I think that is ultimately the best way to assess, I don't think it's practical given the class sizes that we have. If I had 20 students or less in my class, I could absolutely do that and do absolutely do that. But with my large A&Ps, I can't do it.
Oh yeah,
So,
I totally understand that. Like, my short answer is there's usually only 1, 2, maybe even 3 questions. It's usually 3 on an exams, or 1 or 2 per week for the students. But I try to ask them more large-scale comprehensive questions. And you're right, the more students I have, the harder it is for me to give these comprehensive short answer questions. And it's been a balancing act.
I will tell you that in my A&P class this quarter, it's 242. I have 48 students. I emailed them when it all started to crash and burn and said, hey, please let me know if you don't have a computer or a laptop or a monitor. And I got responses from a couple of students who have iPads, which is fine. I had 3 students with Chromebooks. I was able to get those 3 students with Chromebooks alternative laptops, or they figured out a way that they could borrow one from somebody for the proctored exams. I've been using Respondus Lockdown. I do them almost weekly, every A&P quizzes. And I just did a lab exam on Monday that was all lockdown, monitor, proctored. Admittedly, for students, the monitor part didn't work for them, but I would disagree that their lab exam scores matched what they get on, say, a Connect assignment or other types of assignments. I see a large disconnect there.
Thanks, Kim. And Kim, I'm seeing there's lots of folks in the chat who are agreeing with you that with 90 students, it's hard to give feedback. And I guess too, I'm just noticing there's a lot of really good stuff there's a lot of really good comments in the chat. So I'm wondering if, Joe, if you could just speak to the demo of HonorLock being creepy and how you're sort of solutionizing.
Yeah, I'm a fan of students doing their work and getting credit for the work they do and not cheating. And if I think of it on a continuum rather than a binary thing, some are going to cheat. How far am I willing to go, and how much am I willing to put on other students to make sure that few doesn't do it? And when I watched the Honor Lock demo, that just felt onerous. And I am probably flattering myself to think I can write questions that make it hard to cheat in the time that I give students. But I'm going to do the best I can with that and just figure, you know what? I can't stop it. But the other piece I do is I make an appeal to them to say, you know what? Integrity is important in the work you're getting into, or any kind of work, and trying to ask students to step up to that. It may be, I don't believe it's pointless. I think we can be better if we're called to being better. And is it going to work every time the first time? Didn't for me. Why should I expect it for them? So just keep asking. And I didn't want to be the guy standing over their shoulder while they took a test. And by making them do the Honor Lock, that's what it felt like. And I just wasn't willing to do it. So that's been my...
I think Jay wrote something. Jay, could you address what you said in the chat?
I just asked them straight up, and I just created like a scenario. Okay, here you are, you or someone you love, maybe your 2-year-old has an accident, you whip across to the ER, they're in dire straits, and unfortunately the nurse taking care of them cheated on their exams and doesn't know anything, So, yeah, sorry about that. And then I asked them, do you want to be that? Is that the kind of provider you want to be? That is someone who, you're going to tell your patients, don't bring me anything complicated, I cheated. I don't know anything about that. So, and I find that they really do respond to that. You can see their faces kind of look like, oh no, that would be awful. And I'm like, yeah, well, don't do it then.
That's not what I want for myself.
I just kind of wanted to jump back real quick to what Kim was talking about with feedback on short answer quizzes and stuff. I know that a lot of people want to give like really good detailed feedback for each student, but one of the things I learned, I used to work at University of Washington with their intro bio courses, and their intro biology class has 1,200 students in the fall. And I had to grade 1,200 exams over a weekend or a week. I was only grading one question, but when you read the same answer 1,000 times, it burns your mind out. One of the things I learned to do really efficiently because of that was write rubrics, both pre and post grading, that go through and detail, these are what I was looking for in terms of points. This is what, here's some variation in what student answers that I was willing to accept, especially if there were answers that I didn't expect before I graded them and found ones that were good afterwards. And then I give them that generic rubric. I just say, here's my rubric. This is what I was looking at. If you have questions about why your answer got a specific grade and you can't figure it out from that rubric, come talk to me. And I think in the entire time I've been doing this, I've had maybe 7 students ever really question that. I know it's not, again, it's still difficult to go through and read each one of those, answers and feel like you're accurately grading all of them. But I have definitely found that giving that type of rubric has sped up my work because I don't have to go through and comment on every single exam. I can just grade the exam and then pop the rubric up on my module and say, this is what you need to look at once I've finished grading it. Another thing that we did, I don't necessarily do it for my classes because I don't find it super useful in my smaller classes, but in the UW Bio series, was we also gave a chance for the students to submit a regrade for just one question. So if they were per exam, so if they were really, really certain that they got it right and we graded it wrong, they could always fill out a form and explain to us why they felt like they needed it. And that usually, one, kind of helped with metacognition. It made the students have to think about what their answer was and why it made sense or why it didn't make sense, which at times also kind of helped them realize, oh yeah, I was wrong. That wasn't worth any points. Or it made them have to be really creative in trying to explain why they were correct. And most of the time, they wouldn't necessarily get points, but a few times they did. So I think all of those are pretty useful. So that's just some ideas on if you were looking at doing something with short answer questions, just from experience of having to do that many and that frequently.
Jake, thank you for that. Lucas, I know you said that you've rubrics for grading with already built-in feedback, and we do have some, like we could always do for one of these meetings kind of a deeper dive into just like what this looks like more operationally, like on a more practical level as well. Like showing people their rubrics or having people show rubrics, and if that's useful to folks. So it is 2:59. Is there anything else for the good of the order? I hope we didn't abbreviate the assessment conversation too much.
I just like to comment, you brought this up about cheating and would we want our nurse or a doctor to be one of those people? But I think we can use that same argument to say we need to teach depth, because do we want nurses that actually understand what is going on with the disease process when we go to see them? Or do we want nurses that just simply can follow directions, give this drug or that drug, that don't look at the patients, aren't able to analyze things? And that's why I don't think we can just always teach the big concepts. Yes, they're important, but we have to go deeper than that. And that's why I really like case studies. And I've used them for my entire career to try and get people to put things together. When you see this, how does it affect that? And so, and that's one of the things I'm afraid of. As we shorten A&P, we're losing more and more of that ability. And I was actually thinking, as we're talking here, I may opt to say, ooh, can I keep teaching A&P 1 and A&P 2 online? Because if I teach online, I can cover all that material. I can just force students to cover it in the depth that I think they need it to. Whereas if I'm in a classroom and I only meet, twice a week or 3 times a week, I'm going to have to really summarize things down. So maybe online is the best way to go.
Or could you flip? Could you flip the classroom? Could you have the more conceptual pieces happen in the face-to-face environment, but then have them watch the content or listen to the content on their own?
Yeah, maybe.
Lucas has a lot of experience with flipping. Because I think, go ahead, Lucas. You definitely have the ability online to put all sorts of material and learning experiences in to cover more than if you go the traditional, lecturing route, and how much you can cover in a time period. We've been teaching A&P online for a while, but also hybrid format on campus. So we're spending 3 hours on a day in the lab where we're doing all sorts of activities. And I found we've been able to cover more doing the hybrid format than we were doing the traditional face-to-face format, because I could force them to, in a good way, to do things online. And then when we were in class for 3 hours, you could cover a ton of stuff. And we were only meeting 1 day a week for 3 hours, but we were covering more in those 3 hours than we were in some of the traditional lecture lab time spaces. Because sometimes you're meeting for lecture for 50 minutes and 3 days a week or something, and it's like, but you can't do anything that's meaningful a lot of times in 50 minutes, because by the time you introduce and end, so you're just lecturing and you can't cover it the same way. So I found that some of those formats, like Pete's getting at, is you can definitely do things differently and cover that material. And that's what's great about our faculty in Washington, is we're creative and we come up with great ideas. So I appreciate what everybody has shared today, for sure. Yeah, and Jay pointed out in the chat, the flip is a lot of work. And I guess, Pete, the only other thing I would just caution you on is, like, one of the biggest things about content is that it makes, I think it makes us feel good, like when we know we've covered a lot of content, but we don't actually know the mental models that students are bringing to that content and what they're retaining. And so I guess I would just say, I think it's always going to be that give and take of how much content is too much content for someone's mental model. And I guess I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's very old now. It was on PBS, but it was like a documentary on students' mental models and scientific concepts, and the way that sometimes they were interviewing Harvard graduates and asking them, why did the seasons change? And I think like 3 of the Harvard graduates could say why the seasons changed. And then they went back to their 6th grade classrooms and showed that and discovered like what they had learned in a 6th grade science class that had built a mental model that then caused them to like hold that information in a way that actually made it erroneous. And I did not do a good paraphrase of a very complex concept, but I guess I would just be careful about throwing a lot of content at people. And it just like, I think there has to be some attention to the metacognitive pieces of this. Does that make sense?
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges I have is I not only teach, I usually teach an overload every quarter, and I take a college class myself. And I'm always jealous of whether it's history class, an English class, or whatever, of how much time that they actually use just say, well, what do you think about this? How do I do this? Or just sit and write, or let's watch this. Whereas I wish I could do that in A&P. I have to just go fact after fact after fact after. There's so much to learn. I don't know if it's 10 times more or 50 times more, but students will tell you it's a lot more than the English class or the history class or the philosophy class that I've taken. And again, there's a challenge to, again, do you just give them too much? We can only, all of us only learn so much in a certain period of time. So I agree, that's my biggest challenge.
At some point, we'll have a longer conversation as a English/historian. Like, I always had to resist filling their brains with like get me started on Tudor history while we're reading Shakespeare. Like I can't, like you almost, sometimes you just have to let, you know, again, it's different because I'm not like whether or not they understand how Macbeth may or may not be a reflection of Tudor history will not impact whether they're a good nurse and can save lives. Like I understand the stakes are higher, but but I think every discipline has that challenge of just.
No, you're right. I don't mean to demean anything else. I'm not trying to do that. But I know a lot of these classes that I've taken are, well, what do you think about that? And we can spend a half an hour discussing my opinion versus your opinion. Who's right? We don't know because none of us were there 2,000 years ago. And that's all good and fun, and it stimulates the mind. And I wish I could do that. How do you think muscles contract? Oh, how do you think they contract? No, we can't do that. We have to say this is this and that and that and that and that and that. And if you really want to be able to help patients, you have to understand those basics because more and more nurses are being depended on to be almost the primary care people. Mm-hmm. They're responsible. They're going to get their butt sued if things go wrong. And they need to learn more, not less.
Right.
So.
Right. No, I'm
fun discussion.
Pete, you are all good. And at some point too, this group should reconvene, not to talk about A&P, but to talk about like, because actually I think that is actually what Guided Pathways is trying to do. Like I know it's been watered down and people like, I don't know how it's been messaged on campuses, but that is actually what Guided Pathways is trying to do is how do you make sure people get exactly what they need to be really ready for the work, for the workforce. And so it is hard when we design kind of in isolation to do that. And so, but it's a longer conversation and I know everybody has to go.
No, that's great. We have a wonderful gal with Guided Pathway and she's working with the science department really closely. So yeah, it's fun.
I'm glad. Yes, and Joe, you want your nursing students to get more Shakespeare? I want your nursing students to get more Shakespeare. It's so fun.
I was a humanities major before I got into sciences. I think it just enriches everything. So that's why I don't like the Guided Pathways. I want expansive learning, but another story.
I just want to talk to all of you for like 100 more hours because this has been one of the most fun COP meetings we've had, I think. So
I would agree that reading is the most important thing, and you're involved in that. If you can read, you can learn anything. So hats off to you.
Oh, thank you. Love reading.
Yeah,
although I'm so tired these days, I just can't read. I don't know if any of you are having this problem. Like I normally, that's normally my stress mechanism.
Yeah.
And so, well, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for, Lucas just wrote in the chat, you made Jen's day. You did. You totally did. So I'm going to stop the recording.